floor at some point. Well, thank you. I, too, would like to begin with my thanks, which are heartfelt thanks to Luisa, to the Lelio Basso Foundation, for having invited me and having invited me to take part in the organization of these workshops, but also to participate in a beautiful international conference that was held in Rome that went by the title, "Is there a tribunal for Gaza?" That was an attempt of the Fondazione to attract attention to this theme immediately after the molten lead intervention in late 2008, early 2009, that had shocked everyone. And during the last 9 years, there have been many other military actions against the Gaza Strip, and that have been even more destructive, if possible, than that of 2008, that in itself seemed to be terribly shocking. And not only Gaza, but the whole of the Palestinian territory, the West Bank and Jerusalem, during these last 9 years, have dramatically worsened even more, with things stepping up in a truly terrible manner. So it is from this standpoint that I think that the Palestinian situation, and here I would like to react a little to the presentations we heard this morning. Mr. Abraham Berg said, perhaps it's a good thing that the Palestinian issue is not on the agenda every day, because this enables us to work in favor for or towards a peace process without having anyone breathing down our back or down our necks. So I think that instead, this is actually a huge problem. The fact that our mass media, the newspapers, the TV networks and so on, those who should keep an eye on what is happening and the terrible things that are being done in the Palestinian territories and against the people, the Palestinian people. Well, I think that our eyes should instead be firmly fixed on what is happening so as to be able to react in the right manner. Well, I'm a legal expert by trade. I deal with criminal crime and international criminal law. And I'm convinced that it is absolutely necessary to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, especially, and in any case, above all, in legal terms, in juridical terms, not because the political dimension is not important. The political perspective is perhaps higher up. It's like an overview. But we are, from a legal point of view, we are in an evolution, let's say, with regard to the Palestinian situation. And so politics actually has little to say unless certain principles of international law are not reaffirmed and not confirmed. And here I'm repeating what Gaia said about international law and its role and what it should do. But because of the shortcomings, because of our just being by-watchers, well, it's not happening. So the fact of taking the legal perspective and putting it in the forefront, well, this is a teaching. This is something that I have been that I learned from Araji Sourani, the director of the Palestinian Service for Human Rights in Gaza. And this was fundamental for me in understanding what is actually happening in the territories. And I remember very, very well, he would constantly say to all the delegates visiting from the various European governments and non-European governments, the delegations of the International Red Cross, the parliamentarians from all over the world, he would incessantly say, when they would ask, what do you think about the two-state solution? What should be done? And he would say, one state, two states, 1,000, 0 states. We're not interested in that. Right now, what we are interested in as Palestinians is that someone should fight for respect of our fundamental rights and the right to life, which is being trampled on constantly. And as was said quite clearly in the introduction, it is self-evident that right now Israel is truly ignoring and taking no notice of human rights and what the United Nations saying and reinstatement of legality. I am going to try to be very concise because I want time for the debate. So I would like to focus on a single point amongst the many ideas that were presented this morning. There is one in particular that goes even beyond what has been already said, and that is the role of the legal experts and jurists with regard to what is happening in the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And first and foremost, I would like to speak about the role of the Israeli jurists. This is something that we cannot overlook, because as was framed and stated by an Israeli jurist, Michel Stat, that we had invited but could not be here with us. He is a lawyer in Israel, and for decades he has been defending the rights of the Palestinian people, and in particular in the West Bank. So what is happening in Israel at this point in time is an annexation through what he calls loafer, an English term which is difficult to translate into Italian, but if you see the analogy with warfare, so war practices, lawfare is a new term that says using the law as a means, means for making war. So a guy was saying, what Israel is doing perhaps is not more severe, or it is not the worst violation of human rights that has ever happened. There's no doubt about this, but what is important is that it is emptying from the inside the very meaning of international law, and it is doing this thanks to the work of jurists, of legal experts who sit on the various committees, who sit on those committees appointed by the Israeli government, and that are also the judges in the various courthouses across Israel, the military ones, but also the Israeli Supreme Court, which obviously we respect. Well, some decisions that have to do with the Israeli situation of the Jewish citizens of Israel. There's a sort of schizophrenia within the case law of the Israeli Supreme Court, which truly uses a two-speed approach depending on the subject matter put to it. And what, in my view, needs to be understood is that this annexation of the occupied territories is not something that has to do with the future. It's not something that can be debated as if it were a possibility, a hypothetical possibility that may occur. No, it has happened, and it is happening, something that Michael Sfar defines as the biggest paradigm shift since 1967. That is to say that whereas in these 50 years Israel has used practices and actions to make the annexation a fact, so it's a de facto annexation, or facts on the ground, and by establishing or by creating the new settlements and by adopting systems with regard to the roads that separate the Palestinian peoples and the wall that divides the villages and so on. So these are all facts that made annexation a fact. So what we are now witnessing in the utmost silence is a de jure annexation, and this is something that is happening at this point in time, and we need to talk about it, and this is being done through the work of the jurists who are drafting laws that I'm going to briefly present to you, laws then adopted by the European Parliament. No, again, European. I think that this lapsus does have some sort of meaning, says the gentleman, says Franco Ippolito. Well, the Israeli parliament, Knesset, will be passing these laws, adopting these laws. So, and here I truly, I go back to Michael Svard's words, who says the finest of Israeli jurists are working in order to bring about this paradigm shift since 1967. Now, the lawyers of the government are engaged in providing advice on how to write and draft the laws to defend Israel's efforts to expand its jurisdiction and the efficacy of its laws, of its administrative structure, going beyond the boundaries acknowledged at the international level, the line according to the armistice of 1949, and that is the occupied territories, and this to be at the service of the Jewish settlers at the expense of the Palestinians, that are the occupied peoples whose civil rights are suspended, are put on hold. The legal system deriving from all this is a legal system that is a fact in the West Bank, so it already exists, and it envisages that the laws of the Israeli parliament, the civilian laws, normal laws of Israel, should apply also to the settlers who live in the settlements in the West Bank. And as you know, they are not just little villages or small groups of houses, but we're speaking about, including East Jerusalem, they amount to 500,000, that is 350,000 plus 150,000. So we're speaking about towns with all the possible infrastructure, theaters, universities that by law are acknowledged or recognized as being part of the normal education system of Israel. Now, all this just to say that the West Bank, as an occupied territory, is subject to legal orders that are totally different, where the settlers benefit from laws that are favorable for them, including the expropriation of Palestinian land, and in the interest of the settlements themselves, and the colonizers. Those who are colonized, the Palestinians, are subject to military law and have no possibility whatever of claiming their civil rights that they should be entitled to. In a one-state solution, this would be the case. All residents of the territory administered by the State of Israel should all have the same rights. So at this point, they are constantly and regularly using the concept of apartheid. And while a few years ago, in my opinion, people could even have some doubts as to the actual, as to whether this term should really be used to describe what is happening, as a legal term, let's say, to describe what is happening in Palestine and Israel. Well, I think that today there are no doubts with regard to the fact that this is what the situation is. This is the situation of the Palestinians within this larger Israel, which already exists. And the situation is one of apartheid, where one portion of the population that holds power uses all of the mechanisms of administration and of power to maintain its superiority and to maintain a part of the population in conditions of oppression. So, with regard to this, there is a report that I would like to inform you about. You might know about it, but it's worth reading. and it is very significant. It reflects exactly what is happening at the international level when the issue on the table is Israel. It is a 2017 report ordered by one of the United Nations agencies, and it was written, amongst others, by Professor Richard Falk, who was the special rapporteur of the United Nations for Palestine. And this report, after analyzing in depth the situation of the territory, it maintains that what is happening at the expense of the Palestinians is the crime of apartheid. Now, this report was published a day and a half after its publication. It disappeared from the internet, and it never again reappeared. However, on that day and a half, a sufficient number of people had downloaded it so that then it could be reposted on other sites. And obviously, at that point, it was an unhoped for publicity for what had been happening. It has already been translated into Italian. So if you'd like to read it, I'll give you all the information and the references that are necessary. And I would like to close by making a few examples of the discriminations that are a fact by law, that are warranted by the law in Israel. Drawing from this article written by Nina Haas on International, published on International. And on the 4th of March, the Israeli journalist who lives in Ramallah draws up a list of laws that have either been approved or are about to be approved by Knesset. Zone A is an occupied territory. So she said that Ramallah is part of the occupied territories, and somebody seen from the audience seems to be questioning this.
Can you please respond to the fact if Ramallah is occupied territory or not?
Certo che lo... no.
Maybe we can discuss it.
Perhaps we can talk about this in private. No, let's talk about it publicly. Since I don't want to create any type of ambiguity or because of ambiguity, I think that your position is linked to the Oslo agreements that divided the Palestinian occupied territory into A, B, and C. A is under the jurisdiction, political and security jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority that was set up in Oslo, whereas Area B is under Israel, and political control is of the Palestinian Authority, and Area C is where Israel prevails. But the whole of the area, A, B, and C, is West Bank, is Palestinian territory that has been occupied. And the fact that it was created at the Oslo process, which is defunct, an A area, which is made up of urban centers like Ramallah, Janina, and other towns like Bethlehem, Jericho. Well, this removes nothing from the military occupation of the territory by the occupiers who are Israel. And if there are any doubts, I'll pass the floor to Agil Ad.
Like if it was something that you can argue about.
Yeah, I'm surprised that this is even a question. This temporary arrangement, again, it was supposed to expire after 5 years, I'm just like continuing what Chantal was saying, was made, this needs to be perhaps clarified, was made on a demographical basis. This has no geographical logic. So the areas that were designated under partial or supposedly complete Palestinian control are, the big Palestinian cities and the major villages, but they're completely disconnected one from the other. So you end up in a reality that has been in effect for more than a generation by now, in which there are some 170 or so isolated Palestinian islands, A and area known as Area A and B, that are embedded in this ocean of Israeli control, Area C. But by controlling 60% of the area formally, we of course control all of the area and all of the people. Like you cannot travel from one Palestinian city to another without going through Area C. You cannot develop infrastructure that depends on that kind of like interconnectedness without going through Area C. Israel's army routinely goes into Area A whenever it wants. Israel controls the envelope, right? So we decide who goes in and out of the West Bank. People, commerce, everything. And of course, the same thing with regard to Gaza, with the exception of the one crossing between Rafah and the Sinai in Egypt. So, and we control the population registry and so on and so forth. So for anyone to think that somehow Palestinians in Area A live an independent life in a reality in which the Palestinian Authority is, completely exists or doesn't exist absolutely as a result of the Israeli decisions, and even in the best case scenario, serves as the municipality in those areas, nothing more, nothing less. But everyone knows that everywhere in the occupied territories there is one power that controls everything, and that is us. These are undeniable facts.
As soon as Professor Meloni concludes, I'll give you the floor for your comments. I was trying to give a short example of the sort of laws that have been adopted by the Knesset or are now being debated by the Israeli parliament, which according to Amira Haas are clear evidence of discrimination against the Palestinians. The first law, it's the law on the nation state, the Jewish nation state, which has been already adopted after 3 votes, whereby sort of introduces the notion of areas which are reserved for the Jews and where Palestinians have no right to live. And the Arab language is considered as a language with a special status rather than being on a par with the Israeli language. And then there is a difference in terms of how the declaration of war should be exercised. The Prime Minister has the power to declare war after consulting the Defense Minister rather than the whole cabinet. And then there is a law of Jewish tradition. When the state laws are not clear, the judges have got to consult the Halka, the Jewish law, and then the law that will make it mandatory on all enterprises with over 100 employees that refuse to work to announce it openly. And then finally, there is a further law for annulation, whereby the parliament may sort of render null and void the decisions of parliament. For instance, the decision against the deportation of African refugees, which is now being debated. And the next would be the Palestinians or the left-wing activists. This is just to give you some examples of what is happening. If you look at the article written by Michel Sard, well, you'll find other changes which are now ongoing in Israel. In conclusion, I think that if we really want to deal with the problem of failure to achieve a state of peace in the Palestinian-Israeli territory, we have to look at things from a perspective of international law, because the international community was at the core of this very problem, which in 1947, with the declaration of the General Assembly of the UN, has sort of partitioned a territory.
Pensavo fosse per me, non la è.
Sorry, I felt
Il che
there's a problem there.
questa situazione una
And this makes it something which is of concern for the international community and also international law. I'll stop at that. So there will be a possibility to ask questions and to have a general discussion.
Allora, il primo intervento, prego, la signora, no, al microfono, così registriamo.
Use a microphone, please, for questions.